Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936, in Yabluchny, a village in the heart of rural Ukraine in the Soviet Union. Chikatilo is believed to have been born with hydrocephalus, which caused genital urinary tract problems later in life, including bedwetting into late adolescence, despite the ability to ejaculate, the inability to maintain an erection. When his father was conscripted into the war against Germany, he was kidnapped, imprisoned and then condemned by his people for allowing himself to be captured when he returned home. Chikatilo was the target of school bullying as a result of his father's cowardice. Because of his painful shyness, his only sexual experience during adolescence occurred when he was 15. When he is said to have defeated a young girl, ejaculating instantly during the brief battle for which he was mocked even more. This humiliation tainted all of his subsequent sexual encounters and cemented his association with sex as a source of violence. In 1960, he moved to Radionovo-Nesyefteyevsky, a town near Rostov, and began working as a telephone engineer. Concerned about his lack of success with the opposite sex, his younger sister moved in with him and set up a meeting with a local girl, Faina, whom he married in 1963. Despite his sexual issues, they had 2 children and appeared to lead a normal family life. In 1971, Chikatilo changed careers and became a teacher. After a series of complaints about indecent assaults on young children, he was forced to enroll in a mining school in Shakhty, near Rostov. Chikatilo was seen with the victim shortly before she vanished, but his wife provided him with an impenetrable alibi, allowing him to avoid further police investigation. Alexander Kravchenko, a 25-year-old rape prisoner, was apprehended and confessed to the crime under duress, most likely as a result of rigorous questioning. In 1984, he was tried and executed for the murder of Lena Zakutnova. There were no further documented victims for the next 3 years, possibly as a result of his run-in with the law. Chikatilo was laid off from his mining school job in early 1981 and was unable to find another teaching job due to allegations of child abuse. Over the next 9 years, he worked as a clerk for a raw materials plant in Rostov, where the job's travel afforded him unrestricted access to a diverse range of young victims. His next victim was a 17-year-old girl. On September 3, 1981, Chikatilo strangled, stabbed, and gagged her with dirt and leaves to prevent her from crying out. As a result of the brutality, Chikatilo's sexual freedom was granted, and he began to build a pattern of assault that saw him focusing on young runaways of both sexes. He befriended them at train stations and bus stops before luring them into nearby wooded areas, where he attacked, attempted rape, and mutilated them with his knife. In some cases, he ate their genital organs as well as other body parts such as the tips of their noses and tongues. The most common pattern was to inflict eye damage, slashing across the sockets and in many cases, removing the eyeballs, an act later attributed to Chikatilo's conviction that his victims retained an impression of his face in their eyes even after death. When 15 more victims were discovered during the course of 1984, police efforts were significantly increased, and massive surveillance operations that spanned the majority of the city's transportation centers were launched. Chikatilo was arrested for acting suspiciously at a bus terminal at the time, but he was cleared of murder charges because his blood type did not match the suspect description. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison for a series of minor unpaid fines. Chikatilo's actual blood type A differed from the type found in his other bodily fluids AB, because he was a member of a minority group known as non-secretors, whose blood type can only be determined by a blood sample. Chikatilo was able to avoid being charged with murder because authorities only had sperm from the crime scene, not blood. DNA procedures are not susceptible to the same flaws. After his release, Chikatilo found work as a traveling buyer for a railroad firm based in Novocherkassk, and he managed to stay out of the spotlight until August 1985, when he murdered 2 women in separate incidents. Dissatisfied with the lack of progress, Borakov enlisted the help of psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who refined the killer's profile around the same time as these killings. Bukhanovsky classified the murderer as a necro-sadist, or someone who derives sexual pleasure from the misery and death of others. Bukhanovsky also estimated the killer's age to be between 45 and 50 years old, which was significantly older than previously assumed. Borakov was so desperate to find the perpetrator that he questioned a serial killer, Anatoly Slivka, shortly before his execution to learn more about his elusive serial killer. Chikatilo resumed his killings in early 1988, the majority of which occurred outside of Rostov, and victims were no longer kidnapped from local public transportation outlets as police surveillance of these locations continued. Over the next 2 years, the body count increased by 19 more victims, and it appeared that the killer was taking more risk of identification was much higher. The newly liberated media of Gorbachev's Glasnost society put tremendous public pressure on police forces to apprehend the killer, and general police patrols were beefed up, with Borakov targeting potential areas with undercover cops in an attempt to apprehend the perpetrator. Chikatilo eluded capture several times, but on November 6, 1990, shortly after killing his final victim Sieta Korustik, his strange behavior was noticed by patrolling police officers at a nearby station, and his information was seized. His identity was linked to a previous arrest in 1984, so he was placed under surveillance. Chikatilo was apprehended on November 20, 1990, following further suspicious behavior, but he initially refused to admit to any of the murders. Borakov decided to allow the psychiatrist who had created the original profile, Bukhanovsky, to speak with Chikatilo under the premise of trying to understand the psyche of a killer from a scientific standpoint. Chikatilo, clearly taken aback by this method, he opened up to the psychiatrist, detailing all of his murders and even directing investigators to previously unknown bodies. He claimed to have murdered 56 people, but only 53 of his claims were objectively verifiable. This figure was far higher than the 36 cases initially assigned to the serial killer by authorities. Chikatilo appeared in court on April 14, 1992, after being found sane and competent to stand trial. During the trial, he was kept in an iron cage to keep him away from the relatives of his many victims. His demeanor in court ranged from bored to manic, singing and spouting gibberish. At one point, he was accused of lowering his trousers and waving his genitals at the assembled throng, earning him the nickname, the Maniac. The judge appeared to be biased, frequently overruling Chikatilo's defense attorney, and Chikatilo's conviction was obvious. Despite the judge's bias, the trial lasted until August, and the verdict was not delivered until October 15, 1992, 2 months later. Chikatilo was found guilty of 52 of the 53 murder charges leveled against him. He was sentenced to death for each of the murders. Chikatilo's appeal was denied because the mental evaluation that determined he was competent to stand trial was skewed. He was shot in the back of the head on February 14, 1994. The psychiatrist who played a key role in his capture, Alexander Bukhanovsky, went on to become a well-known expert on sexual problems and serial killers.
Guys, if you like or want me to share more criminal stories, please subscribe, like and share my YouTube channel to encourage me to keep sharing stories. Please email or leave a comment in the section below if you have any comments or suggestions.